Module 4, Chapter 7. Really this chapter is going to build on the previous two chapters, Chapters 5 and 6, where we introduced inflation, unemployment, and tracking the U.S. economy. So now we're really going to move into just really looking at unemployment and inflation. We're going to measure unemployment. We're going to talk about the labor force, who's in the labor force, which we define economically speaking as those of age, or at least age 16, that are able to work and are in the workforce. So measuring unemployment, we're looking at those who are old enough to work but are not employed but yet looking for work. So those are some tricky things to do there. So make sure we're reading up that and understanding those definitions and how all those things differ amongst each other. And so when we're talking about that, those old enough or at least age 16, what about those who are not working or are working illegally, perhaps in under-the-table jobs where they're just getting paid cash on the side and they're not reported, or those in illegal activities as in drug dealing or prostitution, stay-at-home moms and dads. So in economics, parents who stay home with their kids fall into the same category as potentially law breakers doing illegal activities. So where do those numbers come up in our GDP and full employment measurements and things of that nature? So remember, there's a lot to economics. It is a behavior science of how people spend and choose to allocate their resources. So those are questions that economically we do address and we enjoy to kind of put into the debate to spur some critical thinking. So I encourage you to think of those as you're posting to discussion boards and things like that, and finishing assignments and summarizing videos. Don't be afraid to challenge what you see and put that in your summaries. Speaking of discussion boards, we do need to start posting earlier. As a matter of fact, if this week in Module 4 discussions aren't posted earlier so that your classmates have time to reply, I'm going to be forced to put the due date earlier, as in Thursday, for original post. So, continuing with Chapter 7, inflation is the other half of the chapter, the general rise of average prices of goods. And so we have kind of two types. We have anticipated and unanticipated inflation. And anticipated is kind of what we expect. As the word anticipate means, we expect it to rise a certain rate. So for instance, if we believe inflation is going to go up 2%, so maybe we have cost of living adjustments and salary increases, but then the unanticipated inflation is 5%. Well then, if we had a raise of say 3% instead of a 1% overall increase, we actually had a loss of 2%. So the unanticipated inflation is really the inflation that's very unpopular, makes people angry, and makes inflation such a hot topic. Two types of inflation that we typically are going to look at economically, and that's the cost push inflation or demand pull inflation. So cost push inflation is the leftward shift in aggregate supply. So supply is going to shift left, and we call that cost push inflation. And then we have demand pull inflation, which is the rightward shift of aggregate demand. So demand pull and cost push. So let's continue working hard on our assignments, get those discussion boards in early, and keep working on these measurements of how we measure unemployment and inflation so that we can continue moving forward in macroeconomics. Thanks, guys.